fact, for instance, that it was QTcinderella mattered to the deepfake. She wasn't any old person. She wasn't less than a human. She was QTcinderella. The deepfake was built around recognizing her not only as a human, but as a subject.
Some guys just really want QTcinderella, you know, like, but to say that it's not, that it's never about harassment or
hold on, whoa, stop. We need to follow the conversation. Hold on, stop, follow the conversation. I never said it's never about harassment. I never said there aren't some people that don't do it. I've never said that it's only, I'm just saying that the primary, that means most of the people that are jerking off to this stuff are probably doing it because they just, it's like a forbidden type of like pornography.
I just got a DM from MrGirl saying...
A strange thing just happened. I just DM'd KellyJean to confirm that she's still platonic with Destiny, and then she said on stream...
Who just joined? Hello?
I joined.
I can't tell the voice. Wait, is that Joanne?
It's a white woman.
Joe.
Oh, okay, now you go. Okay.
Hello.
Jar.
Yeah, that's me.
Never would have guessed
right.
that was only 2 letters. Good one. Okay. Oh, hey.
Well, I just wanted to talk about your porn conversation with Meghan, because I thought she'd do at least a little bit better, and she sucked really hard at even representing any of the SWERF points.
Yeah.
And so I sort of like wanted to go through, because I think that I am not a SWERF, but I think there are some criticisms of sex work and pornography more specifically that are actually valuable to argue about.
I agree.
And so I think generally they argue that there are 3 places where harm can occur. The wider trade, which is where you get the sex trafficking argument and the exploitation, like tricking vulnerable people. They're all mentally ill, they've all been abused argument, which there's no evidence for, and the trafficking data is impossible. You've got the production argument, which is about women being abused on set and women being objectified. And then you've got the effects argument, which is like women are then treated as less than in society. It normalizes degradation and violence against women. It mythologizes consent in acts where consent isn't present, and it like makes men just treat women like shit. But ultimately, I think the radical feminist argument boils down to an argument against liberalism. So, is the speech protection, is the First Amendment sort of speech protection, does that win out over the rights of women if you can make a free speech argument on the part of women in terms of saying that the way women are represented in porn damages their ability to speak within society and have what they are saying heard? And I think there might be like an argument there in terms of, is porn silencing? Does porn contribute to a subordination of women within more general society? And I think you're right in that a lot of these arguments come from like the second wave movement when porn was really different. But I think that OnlyFans and the way that the porn industry has changed has created new problems, not necessarily ameliorated the problems that existed back then.
Yep.
Kyla says she's coming.
Okay. Here is so this is a really hard one to talk around, and I feel like if somebody was really adept in the conversation, you're right in that it does come down to really a big argument about liberalism and where does your freedom end and your societal responsibility begin, in my opinion. So let's say that there were some black people that really loved doing minstrel shows, and they did that like. That was all they did. It was just shows where they kind of made fun of black people and they did all that, right? If that was the case, that existed, would anybody come out and defend them as that's your right to do whatever content you want? You should have the freedom to do that. There might be like all the same arguments made for porn. And I think a lot of people go like, well, no, you're placing black men or black people in a bad light. You can't do this. It's societally irresponsible. It's changing the way that everybody in society views black people by you engaging in this type of content. And in my mind, for SWERFs, and I can't find any SWERFs to make this argument, but I feel like that's the strongest argument in favor of the SWERFy argument. Yes, that porn is fundamentally changing the way that men view and engage with women in society. And how can you possibly tell men in one context to take women seriously and to treat them as equal members when in another context you're saying that like women are to be put on screen and masturbated to, and you know who the cares about any other part about them besides what they offer you in terms of sexual value?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting for me on that is that I don't think it can apply to all porn. I think there is potential for porn. Like if you're willing to say that watching women be degraded on screen in a sexual manner is enough to change the way we look at women in society, then surely watching women be sexually empowered on screen is enough to change the way we look at women in society. And I think that when the sexual liberation movement happened, what was liberated for women was their sexual expression. Women were allowed to look hot. They were allowed to get their tits out. They were allowed to look sexual. But what they weren't allowed to do was actually express sexual desire.
Yeah.
They still weren't able to say, yeah, I f***ing love being choked, that, you know, or like I love, like none of that was allowed. And we still see, that's something I find really interesting about the subordination argument as well, is if you have a problem with subordination being demonstrated in porn, why don't you have a problem with it being romanticized in rom-coms? Why don't you have a problem with women wearing high heels? Why don't you have a problem with men being the ones who have to initiate dates? Because subordination is ingrained at so many levels of our society. Why stop at porn?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And then I think it's curious. I don't know what the response would be, but I wonder if similar arguments could be made patriarchally about how men are seen as like combatant warriors. And how do you square away, like, if porn is bad, well, what about like UFC or MMA? Because this is literally simulated like wartime fighting for people's entertainment, and arguably in a worse manner than porn, because at least porn can be done in a responsible way. Things like MMA or UFC or boxing are always going to leave dead. That's actual abuse. Like, the entertainment is the abusive part. There's not a friendly way to do UFC or boxing. And I'm curious what I don't know what a good SWERF response to that would be. Yeah.
So this analogy is used a lot in BDSM to analogize American football with BDSM. And I actually think, to be honest, I find the analogy really interesting, but I find that it makes a better case for banning American football than it does for permitting BDSM.
Sure.
Because the argument is that you've got the bodies of young black boys who are told that this is their opportunity to get out of poverty, and they sacrifice their time, their relationships, their focus on studies to put all of their energy into this sporting career, where they have high instances of CTE, where they're concussed, where they are violently, their bodies go through extreme violence, and this is all done for entertainment. And ultimately this will be white owned teams for white audiences watching a large amount of young black boys destroy each other, express extreme masculine ideals, and this is something, how can you say that that's different from what porn is doing?
Yeah.
And
or
I
arguably that porn is technically even better than that. Like,
yeah, because in porn, you know, at least you have people who aren't getting necessarily hurt in that way with it, like violent death is like quite not common, but like, you know, CTE and extreme, this is okay for seriousness of injury. It can't be seen as like broken bones, right? Seriousness of injury should be, does it affect your ability to be in the world? Long term, how is this injury impacting you? And this is also the argument in your rape conversations, I think, that you've had recently, something that I think you have hinted at, and your intuitions have taken you to, which is that rape is an ontological harm because it damages your ability to be in the world and to be with other people. It's not necessarily the violence of the act, and it's not necessarily this like idea of like, oh, well, they didn't consent, and now like that really, what hurts you is the fact that your most intimate relationships, your relationship with your own body, your relationship with people very close to you can be extremely affected. And I am someone who thinks that sex is really important to subjecthood and who you are as a person. And if that is destroyed and your relationship with your body is destroyed, it can be a huge harm. But yeah, I think this is the other argument that SWERFs often bring up, which is like, they call it like what do they call it? The magic moral power of consent, or the magic moral power of sex, right? So like, you can have extreme violence, but if it's presented as sex, then suddenly it's permissible. It's okay, because it's just, don't kink shame me. That's my thing, right?
Yeah.
And so SWERFs will have a huge problem with that. And the same with consent. I said yes, so it's ethically fine. And it's like, we do put limits on that. Like, you can't.
Of course, you can't sell yourself into sex slavery or sell
yeah,
sure.
We see that with like the German cannibal case and like lots of cases. There are limits on like what we allow eroticization to sort of like do its moral magic on. But I think ultimately it is more than consent that's happening in these cases that's doing the moral magic. It's like a care for someone's future. When we're looking at pornography, of course there are sets where people are abused. That's true in any workplace. And of course, when it comes to sex, the chances of that happening and the damage that could happen are way higher. But if you've got people who are able to have their desire, this is what I prefer over consent. If your desires are transformative, if you are able, you don't have to express your desire, but if you have the capacity to express your desire and that will be transformative on the people around you, then you are able to be a passive subject. A big thing the SWERFs say that I fucking hate is this idea, like, they're treated like a body. There's violence on their body. Like, even Meghan was saying this yesterday. There's like body thing. It's like, yeah, you're a fucking body. Congratulations. Like, your body is used for things. And there's this this myth that if you do something with your body, it's automatically degrading. But when you talk like that, you've just demonized all sex. There's no way to have sex, especially in a passive capacity where you are receiving, that isn't degrading to subjecthood according to SWERFs, because they can't see a world where you can just take it and have things done to your body that isn't degrading.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to like tease out more of like what her problem was with either sex work or with or even with sex, because they tend to speak like so overly broad that I don't know where your issues lie, because in some ways, because half the debate was her making arguments against all labor in a capitalistic market. That, like, this person wouldn't do this otherwise, and it's like, that's the definition of a job. If you pay somebody to do something,
I always respect your patience in
isn't
dealing
there
with
a
people like this,
difference
Destiny?
between a person not wanting to do something versus a person being willing to do something for monetary compensation? So, for instance,
Well,
I don't
talking
want to
specifically about sex acts. I'm not talking about like I don't know, building a house or like
it's the exact same thing. So let's say somebody comes up to me and they say, hey, I want to have sex with you. And I go, no, I don't really want to. And they go, do you want to have sex with me for $10,000? And I go, yeah, I think I would do that. Is that still me not wanting to do it? Or is it somebody saying like, yeah, I would do that in exchange for that much money?
So do you truly believe that sex, like a woman being penetrated by a dick, is the same experience as a man fixing a car?
I never said it was the same experience. It's
So
not the
why
same.
Are we
There's
comparing these things?
I'm not because I'm trying to get you to give me something different than the definition of a job.
Sex is the difference.
Okay.
Sex is the difference.
Okay.
The sex act is the difference. And
Gotcha.
we know as a culture that sex and sex acts are intimate, and are a space where women are particularly vulnerable. Again.
Okay.
So I mean, sex is meaningful. We know that it is.
Not
sex
necessarily.
Is something...
Hold on. Why do you keep going off on tangents? Okay. If sex might be meaningful to you. It might mean different things to other people. Okay. For some people, it means a paycheck. For other people, it might mean a casual fun encounter. For other people, it might mean creating a family or building a romantic connection. I don't think it's fair for you to define how sex has to be for every single person.
I mean, if sex wasn't meaningful and we didn't understand that sex was something where women were particularly vulnerable and could face like lifelong trauma, then I don't think as a culture we would understand things like rape and sexual assault to be a very big deal. I don't think that as a culture
no one is
we
talking
compare
about rape or
sexual
sexual
assault to like
assault.
having your wallet stolen even, or stealing a cup of coffee or something like that.
I'm okay, just to be very clear, because maybe my positions are confusing. So I am anti-rape and I'm anti-sexual assault. I'm not a fan of either of those things, and I'm not here to argue in favor of any of those things. I understand that women aren't particularly vulnerable during sex. That's probably true. How do you feel about male prostitutes then? Do you think that it would be ethical for men to do sex work?
What I don't think is ethical is, again, for a man to pay a woman or a man for sex.
Okay, I'm asking
the
if
person
a
who's
woman
selling
paid a
the
man.
sex, I think, is doing something because they need the money, and probably they have a whole host of other issues.
You're projecting
Again, there's
hardcore.
lots of-
Everybody's got issues. Okay.
No, I mean, it's true.
No.
If
Okay,
you talk to anybody in the porn industry, you know that people are suffering from serious mental
necessarily
illness
true.
and substance abuse. And
listen,
the same thing is true of prostitution.
Yeah, when you've built your whole life on being anti-porn, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of anti-porn people in the industry.
My whole life.
I've talked to a lot of pro-porn people that are in the industry and out of the industry, okay? You can't keep appealing to like, well, some of the people that I've talked to don't like it. There are a lot of people that do it now that are making a ton of money that would rather do that than work at Starbucks, which I think they should have the opportunity to do. So I'm going to ask again, do you think that it's unethical? Is it unethical to pay? Is it unethical to pay men for sex if a male wants to do pornography or if a male wants to sell his body for sex? Is that unethical?
Yeah, I think it's unethical to pay anyone for sex.
Okay. then the vulnerability and the penetration part don't matter then. I don't know why you'd bring that up if a guy can't even sell his body for sex. Or saying that like sex is inherently like violent exploitative thing. It's like, well, what if it was like a man being paid for sex by a woman? And she's like, well, I'd have a problem with that. And it's like, okay, well then the woman vulnerability part you don't care about that much, right? It seems like that's not a but we didn't get anywhere in our conversation.
But I think there's a really good sorry, Kyla.
I don't mean to interrupt the flow. I'm super curious to ask like one question that I've been thinking about specifically with SWERFS, since we're talking about SWERFS now. A lot of what I've heard like Meghan argue, like one of the compelling arguments that I've like listened to is like this element that reinforces kind of like the societal view of women as sexual objects. I'm not sure how you feel about that personally, Joe, because I don't want to like label you with any argument points. But I've been trying to like process through what I think about that, and it feels very akin to kind of like stigmatizing arguments that you might use, for example, like the mental health field instead. I'm curious, just like, I don't mean to totally derail, but do you think that in many ways that argument of like it's reinforcing these societal norms is fundamentally to some extent like a stigmatization, like porn is stigmatizing women and like saying they are only sexual objects? It's like a stigma attached.
Yeah. Well, I kind of would fold that into the subordination argument, and I have a real problem with the sex object thing, because we are all necessarily subjects and objects. You cannot be a subject to another person. You are always going to be something that someone responds to. And being objectified isn't always negative sexually.
Yeah.
We like to be seen. That's an important part of forming our sexual subjectivity, is being seen as hot. We want to be seen as a sexual thing. In fact, for pregnant women, fat women, old women, disabled women, the fact that they are invisible to the sexual gaze is extremely harmful. So I have a problem with, one, objectification being seen negatively. Two, the fact that, no, it's not objectifying, right? Because when you watch porn, what's getting you off isn't necessarily just their body. It's the fact that they're moaning and they're asking for it and they're enjoying it, or they're not enjoying it. And that is the performance of a subject, not an object. So the actual problem isn't objectification. It's something, there's a really cool person I like called Anne Cahill, and she argues for derivatization. The idea that my desires are derivatized to only be your desires. So what I'm allowed to want and perform and do ultimately can only be a reflection of what you want. And so women's sexuality is stunted because it can only be a reflection of men's sexuality. And I think there's real merit in that. But
the male gaze kind of argument, right? That it all exists through like male and female sexuality exists through the lens of like what men want. Yeah, and I think there's real arguments behind there too. There's something you said real quickly that was interesting as well, that like when objectification becomes just watching the performance of someone else, and this is again why I wish we could have spoken more, is she's making an argument against like so many different forms of entertainment as well. For instance, like, am I objectifying an actor when I watch a movie? Am I objectifying an artist that might be part of like a performance, you know, that involves their body? It feels like the same type of like objectification argument can apply to literally all of these things. And I don't know where she would go to learn on that.
This is an example I love, which is like, I heard her be like, no one cares about like how that sex worker feels like after the act. And it's like, when you go to a lawyer to draw up a will, do you care about your lawyer's life at home? No, you care about their ability to do their job. And that's, you're not objectifying someone by allowing them to do their job, and not like being like, you don't go to the doctor's office and be like, and how are you? Like what's going on for you at home? And then the other thing is,
sorry to interrupt again. Aren't you kind of objectifying them? It's just the issue is like objectifying people is sometimes like completely normal. Like it's just like not the end of the world.
Well,
kind of the way you described it.
The reason I stop short of objectifying is because you are an important part of that person's subjectivity is their expertise. And this is what I see as the difference, right? The reason I think that sex work, and I'm talking sex work more broadly than just pornography now, can be ethically dubious, is that I would love a world where people went to sex workers as experts in sex and experts in pleasure. And so when you go to a lawyer to write up a will, you're going to them because they have expertise that you don't. So their subjecthood exists beyond your understanding of them and what you understand. So that you aren't expecting reciprocity, and you can say, I need a will, but you can't say like, I want the will written in this way, and you can go to a doctor and say, I feel sick, but you can't tell them how to diagnose you or what medicine to give you. They have expertise that extends beyond you. Right. And that's expertise as part of the subject, not an object. An object is something that is just for you to view and project onto.
Right. I guess the expertise thing is kind of interesting because in many ways, like we have sex therapists, sexologists,
Yeah.
and people who label themselves as sex experts. But when I think about expert, I think about expertise, right? And then I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, are we now, does that mean that sex workers in this worldview that you're outlining would to some degree have like education or training or like some formal like knowledge that's conferring them this expertise? Or are we conferring
I
the expertise
think
just on like experience in the field, in like the quote unquote field?
sex is a trade. Like one of the worst things that ever happened to acting was that it became a university degree. You should learn certain things by just doing it. And I think that sex workers who engage in a lot of sex and have had experiences with a lot of different people would over time, their expertise would increase. There are lots of trades that you learn through doing. I don't think you need a university degree in sex. I think that would make you, like, you could be a sexologist that way. But I think a sex worker would be a trade.
How do you deal with the fact that with that male gaze argument, it feels like right now, even as sex work has become better, the mass performativity of sex is for men. Like even as women like shift off of hardcore stuff and just do lewds or whatever, at the end of the day, it's still about like the appeasement of the male sexual appetite. And then if somebody were to take it a step farther and say, because we fundamentally engage with sex differently as men or women, it is literally impossible for that to change. How do you address that?
Well, so I love something by this person who I thought was called Luce Irrigare, but apparently her name is Luce Irrigare, which is called an ethics of difference. And it's this idea that men and women will fundamentally be different, especially when it comes to like sexual pleasure. But at the moment, there is no space for that acknowledgement of difference. We don't even know what women's desire looks like when it's performed because it is so tied to men's desire. So understanding women as ontologically different, knowing that we start from at least two different kinds of subject to it and that there is no universal person, means that the women's sexuality would be totally different. Now, I don't know how we get there, but what I was saying before is that if we're saying that porn, is representing women badly and creating this subordination in society, then surely that's a side of transformation where it's possible we could have women representing things well. And I think OnlyFans, I have huge problems with it. On the grounds of I have huge problems with the gig economy generally and platform economy generally. I think there are, in the same way that there are risks for you being a streamer in terms of you're very dependent, if YouTube booted you, you'd be fucked to an extent. If you got injured at work, I don't know if you got repetitive strain injury or something, you'd be responsible for all the bills to do with that. If you decided to stream with someone else and you went crazy and assaulted them, then there'd be no protections for that in this gig economy. So there are certainly negatives to more independent forms of pornography, but I think that's also a place for great exploration where we can start to see stuff that's done differently, where women are saying, no, you know what, I want to show you what I'm into and what I like. And of course, sex is something we do with one another, and speaking heteronormatively, of course women are going to have desires that involve men and involve heteronormative sex practices. But we can maybe move away from that when women are sort of dictating the content more.
Would we?
I don't know if we would.
If you're primary, because I'm thinking it has nothing to do with the supply side of this and it has everything to do with the demand side, where the problem is your primary consumer of sexual content are men. So even if women are the primary providers, does it ever change?
Do you think that's shifting?
Men
though?
like content. That's okay. Men like content that women like to produce as well. So they often like to know that you are really into what you are doing. So if they see
part of my
that,
problem though, Kelly. I totally get it. But one of my biggest problems with the porn industry is porn literacy, right? In the same way that we have bad media literacy today, I think we have terrible porn literacy in that. But
that just means that what we do, if we're appealing to men, we're bad. If we're appealing to ourselves, we're bad.
I don't think. Wait, hold on, real quick on that. I don't think women don't make porn that appeal to themselves. And if women make porn if women
true.
wait, stop. That is absolutely true.
Do you think cosplayers would make cosplay porn, considering
the
how inconvenient and
the vast majority of porn appeals to men. Women that do the huge booba cosplay and shit do so typically because it appeals to men. Yes.
But it's appealing to themselves because they're big anime fans.
It's appealing
to
to, I think,
anime titties. So they're doing things they like as well. They're including the things that they like, that they genuinely enjoy in their stuff when they don't have to.
Do they do it because they enjoy doing it, or do they do it because it appeals to men and because they get the
because they like it, because they're doing things that they're combining things they like with things that potentially men would like, which is
I'm
the
not
porn
arguing.
part, yeah?
I'm not arguing that women don't love what they do. That women can't experience great amount of desire in performing things that men desire.
It's not just the performance; it's the inclusion of other things that they like.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is derivatization as a model says that your ability to experience your desires are limited by borders created by men. So you might super love what you're doing within those borders, but you never get to explore the desires you have that don't have any relationship to men's desires.
Yes. So there might be some things that women like doing that they get to do, but it's only going to be the things that men also really like.
Do you guys think that this is kind of a reflection, though, of because like the dominant consumer, like the industry itself is much more serving towards men, but like I'm seeing they're obviously niche categories right now, but they're not so niche that they're small, right? Like women do consume lots of porn. It's just not the porn that we think of when we say porn. It's not like Pornhub, but they're consuming tons of like not safe for work audio files where it's just like men like saying like, yeah, like your daddy's girl and stuff like that. And they also consume tons and tons of erotica literature, both like written fanfic and audio as well.
Audiobook, yeah.
Yeah, and so like in many ways, like erotica is the female gaze, and I'd be curious to know like if we started doing visual style erotica. So you've got a TV series that is built on like building this relationship, because that's a huge part of the erotica is the relationship, the dynamic, the emotions at play. I bet that would sell really, really well, because this idea that like women don't want to consume porn because they can just get sex doesn't really sell. Like that doesn't appeal to me, because there's tons of women that don't really want to have sex but do want to have like sexual times and sexual like experiences even just by themselves. And so I'd be curious, like if we had an industry that started catering more to like essentially like the quote unquote like female gaze, we'd probably start seeing like TV series, like erotica TV series forming that would honestly like do really well. I would guess. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess.
Isn't that kind of the model of dating shows in some way?
I think dating shows aren't very erotic. They're not charged on like...
Because there's no sex. There's no actual sex. Like erotica is specifically like when you read an erotica novel, it's describing everything.
Okay,
yeah, it's like, okay, there's sex, but it's like a very I have such a lisp, I'm sorry. It's a very aesthetic sex in terms of like, yeah, we're gonna have sex because he's an 8 and I'm a 6 and we're the two people who are hottest, so we're gonna fuck one another. It's not like the tension building up where, like, look at something like Twilight, which, you know, I'm not a fan of, but you've got books and books and books there of no sexual content, but a stack of sexual tension. And that's why the women went crazy, because they were like, oh my God, like, yes, he fucking wants her and she wants him, but it can't happen. And that, women love the build-up.
Gotcha. Okay, wait, so Joanne, going way far back. So what was your original response to if people state that right now the sex industry is largely built around what men desire, that could you argue that that's a form of minstrel show for women, for a SWERF person? Like, how do you get around that argument?
This is why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm not completely against radical feminist arguments against porn. I think some of them are convincing. I have real issues with, and I try and separate it out of my head because I think the algorithm is responsible for a lot of this, but like the fact that choking and anal are now like mainstream things and sort of like the base for all porn, and the fact that like extremely violent porn, it's not that it's mainstream, but it's the internet has made everything so accessible and so continuously there. I do have problems with it. I don't like seeing violence against women eroticized, even if that is like, I don't mean to kink shame. Like it's just, I
have a really hard time seeing, maybe you agree, and I wish there was a way to quantify this, maybe Ayla's done a survey. If I could see a guy's porn habits, I feel like I could probably divine a little bit of information about how he views women in real life. Like, man, I might be wrong about that, but like if a guy is like into like, I watch a lot of non-consent stuff, I watch a lot of like choking, anal abuse and all of this, but like in real life, I'm a perfect gentleman. I wonder how well that tracks. Like, I feel like a lot of them probably could correlate some of their social views with their porn consumption, but I could be totally wrong on that. Yeah.
There was a meta-analysis on pornography and sexual aggression that came out last year, and it found that porn habits didn't tend to influence sexual aggression, but I I don't know. Violent porn was weakly correlated with greater sexual aggression.
I don't necessarily just mean like sexual aggression. I might mean like overall attitudes towards women. So like, for instance, like I would never be sexually aggressive, but I'm into like choking and, you know, hardcore anal and all of this stuff because like I think women are kind of just supposed to take it in society. I'm not gonna be sexually aggressive, but like you have worse social view. I don't know if it is the case, and I'm just curious.
Well, I mean,
we could probably divine this a little bit. Like, I'd be curious to know how much, for example, because there is studies at least like in criminal populations of porn consumption and like penile response specifically to different types of visual stimuli, and like using that to track on things like recidivism and like stuff like that. So obviously it's a really, really low resolution to like what your guys are talking about, but I can't remember. I should pull up some of the studies, but there's really interesting stuff about like which people react to which type of porn, and some of it actively predicts recidivism, and other stuff that you would expect would predict recidivism really just doesn't. Which obviously, doing a crime isn't the same thing as like how you mentally treat other people, but you would suspect that it's somewhat akin because you're probably more likely to do a crime against somebody that you've dehumanized more in your head.
But it's the gamer dilemma, right? Like, does shooting people in video games make you more violent in real life? It's the same sort of thing. But I think that's why I bring up the algorithm, because it's like, are people watching violent porn because they're into it, or because they've just watched so much normal porn that they need something more intense to get them off, and then they go down weird rabbit holes, and suddenly they're watching like flushy porn that's incest porn, this like crazy shit, just because they need the taboo to get off.
I think,
and that's not something they're into.
I think something that you have to be careful of is I think there's a meaningful difference between shooting people in video games versus masturbating towards somebody. Have you ever heard about like women playing D&D? Like, you're familiar, like women can play Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
So there's like an interesting thing where it's like you can murder a woman's NPC or a woman's player character. So I said PC. You can murder a woman's player character, but can you rape a woman's player character? So, well, if you can murder it, you should be able to rape it, right? Well, but no, absolutely not. So then the question is, well, why not though? And I think the reason why is because when you are raping a woman's player character, it's not just something that's happening in a fantasy anymore. It's like it's more of a real thing, right? So like when we're shooting people in video games, that's not like a stand-in for like I'm getting the same satisfaction I would get if I was actually shooting somebody. But when we masturbate to a porn, we are getting that same type of sexual satisfaction. Even if it's not the same as fucking somebody, it's still like you're hitting like on that like sexually satisfying type of thing in a way that shooting someone in a video game doesn't hit on like murdering someone at all, I think.
Well, one thing that's interesting about this, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of actually the studies on video games and how it relates to like later aggression, but there was really interesting studies that were done in like early 2000s because all of the like boomers
Jack
were afraid
Thompson,
of video games. Yeah, but the findings were quite fascinating because what we found is that like if you had adults playing violent video games, right? So they played a bunch of violent video games, and then we gave them like a stranger situation where there's possibility of escalation of like violence, like just like yelling at people and stuff like that. If adults played a video game, they would experience like kind of an acute increase in kind of violent proclivities, right? So immediately after the video game, they're a little bit more likely to do violence, but that effect tapers off very quickly, and it doesn't seem to have like a chronic long-term effect on how violent that individual will be, unless that person is young, right? And so this is about like developmental windows and schemas. So like I think a really interesting thing about porn that I've heard a lot of the SWERFs bring up is specifically like developmental ages of consumption of porn, which is of course a myriad of problems about how to even control it. But in the case of video games, at least, what we found is that if children were exposed to violent video games before their schema around violence itself had properly like formed in the greater culture, these children were more likely long-term to like present some increases in aggressive externalizing behaviors compared to children that weren't raised on like violent video games, but also media. It was actually the same effect whether it was TV or video games, which I'd be super curious to know. Like, I don't know if like a 21-year-old watching this all the time might be an issue. I'd wonder how much it would map on similarly, especially because like something like sexual orientation seems really fixed, but like are sexual preferences fixed? I haven't seen as much evidence to suggest that they're as rigid as orientation.
That was one of the reasons before that I was like, I'm really one of my concerns is porn literacy, especially with the advent of OnlyFans, where you have all of these creators who are like, no, I'm authentically enjoying what I'm doing. And because people are really having sex, right? It's not like the movies where it's simulated, these people are really having sex. There needs to still be some literacy for young people who have access to porn to be able to say, these are, like, not like a jackass, like, don't try this at home sort of thing, but like there needs to be some way to teach children that like these are still porn professionals who are doing acts that aren't necessarily normal or like what you should be doing. These aren't necessarily like standard things. Or I don't even know what the answer is there, but I feel like in on the one hand, the authenticity of the desire we see in these independent creators is great because we want like porn stars to be actually having desires and demonstrating what that looks like. But on the other hand, we don't want like people assuming that authenticity, which may or may not be there.
Yeah, like if you were to watch an action movie and assume that like a police officer acts in a certain way, it's going to give you a bad understanding of like what it's like to do police work or what it's like to be a lawyer or to be a doctor. Like is house representative of what's going on in a hospital? Like all of that, we would obviously say like, okay, well, this is really bad. We want people to think this is what really happens in hospitals.
Yeah.
But then for porn, it's like maybe women really do like to just be like slapped in the face really hard without even asking because that's like a thing. Like again, that it's a different thing.
This is my OnlyFans girl, and I know her, and she says even when she's not having sex, she says that she loves it. And like I talk to her, and I know her, and she wouldn't lie to me about this. Like,
it makes everything like very, very, very complicated. Yeah,
it's a terrible schema for consent as well because it's like, see, they're super enthusiastically giving consent, and you're like, are they real? Like it appears in many ways, but like probably when they're not like, as you said, like being authentic, when they're saying like yes. Are they really saying yes? Are they really giving like obvious visual cues that they're saying yes? Or they're like hamming it up? And like, how do you at like 14 kind of tell the difference between that? Yeah, it's
super. And I think that's hard. Like when it was just the porn, like what are some porn companies? Like the bangers? Whatever. When it was just the actual porn companies that were doing I don't know, doing the little scenes and stuff where it was quite obvious that it was a porn scene. I feel like it was easier to be like, okay, this is porn. And now with OnlyFans, it's like, no, she loves it.
Yeah.
Like that's just she just turned on the camera accidentally. Like she just thought I was already going to do it. Why not? And so like I
think OnlyFans as a platform specifically has a number of rules of content that you can't actually put on
it doesn't matter. So the same thing. Like I think that's like the issue with a lot of like amateur porn is like
Yeah, I mean, this is true for a lot of other websites, I'm just saying. I'm not saying that there isn't still violent porn being produced out there, but there are a lot of restrictions on a lot of platforms about it now. Sorry, did I kill the conversation?
I don't know anything about OnlyFans restrictions. I have no way I can't contribute to the conversation being completely there. I don't know.
And I'm not even necessarily talking about like violent porn. I'm just saying like attitudes towards sex are harder to determine when there's like a layer of assumed authenticity. And while we want that authenticity on the one hand, that's what I'm saying in terms of like, porn
blurry,
looks different. From what it looked like. Because I also have a lot of sympathy.
I'm sorry. It's just
tell me.
It's the best example in the world. When people watch MMA and UFC, nobody there is under the assumption that the people are there for like fun, right? They're there to fight because it's their sport, and that is very, very, very clear. But do you know what wasn't clear was people that did pro wrestling. And in that sense, you got kids that would emulate some of the pro wrestling stuff because stuff that wasn't real ended up like looking real because that's kind of the drama that they sell. And then you run into that issue where whether or not somebody can discern what's happening, and it hits well on Erudite's point that it's before your schema of like fighting or reality have developed. You get very, very weird interactions there. I think that's a good comparison between between like OnlyFans and shit.
I think the porn industry looks different today than it did when the original arguments were coming out. Some of them hold still. So I think there is still some question, as Erudite brought up, about the subordination. Like, because the argument that McKinnon et al. Were putting forward was that, I'm a big believer in this, like words and how we talk about people and how we view people and how we present them shape reality. So if you've got a bunch of porn out there that's constantly showing women as subordinate, taking this violent action and liking it, then women will be mythologized as subservient to men, enjoying rape, enjoying violence, and this will also result in the viewers further subordinating women in their life.
Yeah, like how could you possibly escape that? Like, it seems like you're asking for somebody to be greater than what we would expect an average human to do. Like, consume all of this content that's pointing you down one direction, but don't actually go down that direction, essentially, right? Like, imagine if we were consuming media where the bad guy was always an Arab, the bad guy was always Muslim, the suicide, right? If you're doing that for enough time, eventually you're probably going to think like, damn, you know, maybe these people, like, these thoughts will start to proliferate your mind at some point. So why would porn be the exception? But I will say on the counterpoint to that, porn has gotten more and more has proliferated in society more and more and more, but our attitudes towards women, I would argue, have gotten better over the past 10,000 years, right? Over the past 2,000 years for sure.
And I think that's one of the really
violent porn has actually gone down though. Like, obviously this is going to be based on like what's freely available, so it's possible that the research I've seen on this is limited by like them accessing probably more like Pornhub, like standard websites, and not like seedy, like other harder to access locations for porn, obviously. But what we did see, at least in the cases of like Pornhub, is that like consumption and production of like highly violent stuff is on the decrease, and like less and less preferred over time, which like could just be a selection bias, like I said. But I find it an interesting finding, if nothing else, because I feel like we have this perception that it's getting worse, it's getting more violent.
No, it's not even. I think it's even if we took so something that's. When McKinnon and stuff were making these second wave arguments about porn, at the same time, they were arguing for a change in the definition of rape. Because at the time, rape was very much seen as sex. And so a lot of the violence in it was sort of eradicated, which is where this kind of phrase came out that rape isn't about sex. It's about control and power. This really took hold at this time. And so the thing that's difficult for me is that, hang on. I cucked myself with my brain. Hang on. So I understand.
You're making an argument about like what is rape and the redefinition of rape by second wave feminists, right?
Yeah, and you can understand why at the time, when marital rape still wasn't an issue, when domestic violence was still very much allowed, when sexual harassment didn't exist as a concept, and you've got because rape is viewed as sex, a lot of the time the argument is, well, the woman must have done something to excite the man, because if he wanted sex from her, she must have excited him in some way. So you've got a very pernicious sexual landscape that then violent porn is a part of, or porn, not even violent porn, but aggressive pornography, where women are always like, at this time, you also had second wave feminists saying that all penetration under patriarchy was rape, because the idea of such an asymmetrical gender relationship meant that women never fully had a non-coerced ability to consent.
Yeah. So so you're basically like, the issue there is you're dropping porn into an environment where women are basically being raped, and it's like socially accepted for it to happen. So of course your view of porn in that environment is going to be way different than where we're at today for porn.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I agree that like violence in porn may have gone down over like the last, I don't know what your study said, 10 years, but you also have the internet, which creates a completely different situation to what porn was in the 70s and 80s, where porn is never able to really be erased. It's super easy to share. It's super easy to get your hands on, and it's just completely different in terms of like amplification, the fact that you don't have a right to be forgotten. So there are new issues that, even if the porn is like, this is my issue with like, how do you regulate it? Because I think we have like a bit of a soft porn culture, and if you have issues with porn, I don't know how you find the limiting principle there.
Yeah.
But it's like,
well, I think
it's not even that it's violent, it's just everywhere.
Yeah, that's a whole different question of like, what would we even begin to do? But I think the moral part of it, or the societally ethical part of it, I think is interesting. But I never hear any of the SWERF people, I guess, discuss that in any of the conversations I've heard. Maybe, I'm sure, hopefully there's books or something where they talk about it, but damn, when they talk about it, it's when they talk about it like in panels and stuff, it's just fucking horrible. And I also think there's an issue where I think there's a problem when you get people that build their whole lives around like a small subset of like an ideology. So it might be TERFs, it might be SWERFs, but like just on a personal level, like there's no way that Meghan person, no matter what happens, she will never change her mind on porn because like the last like 10 years of her legacy and career are built around being opposed to it, right? Or same thing with like J.K. Rowling and trans people. Like she's never going to move at all ever on trans people, except to become worse towards them because now she's built like so much of her reputation around like her thoughts on trans people. And that's kind of annoying, I guess, on a personal level too, that it's like there's not even room for these people to change basically.
But it's also annoying because it's like you're not helping the people you say you care about. You're just making, like, if sex workers were suddenly liberated and there was no issue for them, that person would be out of a job. They've built their job security into that person's suffering, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
I found something interesting. If I could go back super quickly, and then I got to bounce. But talking about
you talk about what you came to talk about. I'll shut the.
Well, I know Destiny was saying that he was wanting to mention something to me. What's up? Is there something specific?
Yeah. Well, like real quick, it had to do with, you had what, 4 minutes?
Yeah, I got 4 minutes.
No.
Really quick, it just had to do with like women's communication style. It was just a question that I had. I noticed that
Do you want to talk after my conversation with Professor Aqua?
Yeah, sure. Basically, my question is going to be that I think that I personally believe that women are socialized to communicate in certain ways, and I think that these ways that they're socialized to communicate with are just, they come off as really bad, even if they don't mean to, in broader conversations. And I just wanted to know your general thoughts and feelings about that. So, like for instance, like it might be intonation of like,
thoughts about
I'm sure you do, because you communicate in like a more masculine sense, right? Would you say?
Way.
Exactly, yeah. And then Lauren did that, but like Pixie doesn't, that Katie girl doesn't. There are some people that don't, and for some of them, having like debates or aggressive conversations is really difficult because they're always going to come off as really passive aggressive and people are going to dismiss them immediately, even though I was just curious what your thoughts are, but okay, we can talk about that when your conversation.
It's about like women are not really integrated on their schema of like violence and aggression in general, and so like they kind of have like one fail-safe, which is like to be like passive aggressive. But I think women can be aggressive and assertive really well, just with like the proper education.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. And I was going to even say like I think a lot of women will come off as passive aggressive, but they're not even trying to be. Like it might be the thing of like, if I ask you a question, like I might say something like, do you really think that this is the case for this? Whereas like a woman phrase, it might be like, do you really think that that's right? And the way that she said is like, God, you're such a passive aggressive cunt. Whereas for a man, it's like, oh yeah, like we're getting aggressive, we're having a good conversation, like I feel it. Like just like on the intonation alone, it feels like the woman is like at a disadvantage kind of, so I was just curious, But.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about, what was that, there was that chick who made that fake like blood test thing that like conned a bunch of people. I always forget her name.
Elizabeth
she did like
Holmes.
Thank you, Elizabeth Holmes, in that fake deep voice. Like there's strong suspicions she has that fake deep voice, which is
No, it is true. Her voice is fake. Yeah.
And Paris Hilton does the opposite.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like my friend's a vocal trainer, and so it's very interesting for her to talk about like where we place our voice and the like effects that it has on people hearing that. But yeah, I think that's about it. I have to get going.
Be careful.
Maybe Joe, I'll talk to you some other time. I have a question about like stigma and words and narratives in SWERF world. I know you're not a SWERF, but you probably know it more than I do. So.
I'm actually, I get labeled as everything bad whenever I come here, so I'm happy to take on the SWERF title for the time being and be their representative.
Okay, awesome. Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
One thing I wanted to go back and forth on just quickly.
Yeah, go, because you always talk shit in chat and then you dip. So.
Because can I tell you? Okay, one, I'm in my shy era, and I can't help that.
Cringe.
It's cringe. I acknowledge that it's cringe, but also that's just like I can't help that. And two, you always do. I don't want to interrupt when you're doing other stuff.
Why? Everybody else loves interrupting. Okay, just do it.
It's my feminine vocal pattern. It's
Yikes, not good. Imagine saying feminine and being Australian at the same time. Good one.
Okay, I want to talk about the free speech argument on this, which is ultimately, so it was pushed more by Ray Langton than it was by Catherine McKinnon, but it's the argument that when women say no, it can't be heard as a no, because when women say no in porn, it's so often heard as a yes.
Sure.
And so the argument from Ray Langton was it's an illocutionary harm in that women can say yes, but it's heard as no, and therefore there is a free speech violation against women when it comes to porn, and that there should be a free speech protection for women that knocks out porn. Then there was a guy called Dworkin who argued back against this. Very confusing because Andrea Dworkin is obviously a very famous radical feminist, but this guy, Richard Dworkin, argued that like negative liberty and positive liberty can't be confused, and that we can't have a speech right, which is that in like, okay, like with me just now when you're like, you should come on, it's like there can't be a free speech right where you have a right to circumstances that encourage you to speak, and that you have a right that everyone else that you speak to has to respect and grasp exactly what you mean when you speak. Like, we can't have that free speech right for anyone. That makes no sense. And he argued, he gave the example of like creationalists and flat earthers and bigots. He says they speak, but they're ridiculed. And so like we should be able to say, you know, hateful, like people are allowed to say bad things about women, and then we can trust that it'll be ridiculed, or like there'll be less enthusiasm for them to speak because we know that like
it's good to limit that type of stuff, kind of, or
yeah, but we do it naturally. We don't need to say creationists can't talk about what they have to say, and we should not think that it violates their freedom of speech that we have arguments against the creationist narrative. So, for instance, creationists couldn't say, you have to ban books that promote a theory of evolution on the grounds that some of my speech may be affected by that because people won't hear it the way I want them to hear it. And so he would say that, like, to claim a meaningful right of speech requires a guarantee of a sympathetic or even competent understanding of what someone is saying goes way too far.
Okay.
But then the SWERFS, and this is what I want your opinion on, would say back, well, and SWERFS and critical race theories agree on this because they also talk about hate speech, but they say creationalists are a minority group because they've already had their views tested, debated, and empirically rejected through fair democratic discourse. Their views are ridiculed for legitimate reasons on the grounds that free speech is meant to be a search for truth. But this isn't the case for women because the reason their views are ridiculed and dismissed has everything to do with an asymmetrical dominance of group that has historically been able to exercise power and discount the views of the other, and has nothing to do with the merit of the ideas of the speaker. It has to do with the construction of the speaker. So choosing to respect the right of dominant groups' free speech over the rights of the minority is just a reification and glorification of the status quo. And pornography denies an equal opportunity to influence things because of a free speech violation on the grounds that it illegitimately constructs the speaker as automatically wrong or less than.
Okay, you're gonna have to find a way to condense that a little bit if you want me to respond a little.
Okay.
I think because I might fight immediately on the premise of freedom of speech. It only exists as it does because it's meant to facilitate like a search for truth. I don't know if that's something that everybody would agree with. Do you know? Is that like a thing that is just by?
Well, I mean, that's the John Stuart Mill position, that the reason we have free speech and the reason that everyone should be allowed to talk is because in the marketplace of ideas, ideas will battle, and we eventually will come out with the one that is the most true.
Sure. I guess, far be it from me to challenge anything
John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, that somebody that's taught in every philosophy and political class ever would say. But like, my understanding would be that freedom of speech is probably something that's necessary for any democratic society to exist, because necessarily you're going to need buy-ins from different groups of people that aren't going to agree on things. And as soon as you get rid of freedom of speech, you're necessarily empowering some groups of people to limit some people's speech and others not. And then you just basically a democracy can't function in that environment. Here's the weird thing about allowing, here's the weird thing in my mind about that, what you just gave, that idea about freedom of speech, is that if that is what we think that freedom of speech means, this is just a search for the truth, then that means that ultimately freedom of speech is a battleground for ideas where eventually we're going to resolve a lot of things down to, you know, propositions of things that can be true or false. So like, for instance, the only reason we allow multiple religions to exist in society is because at some point we're going to figure out which one is right. Is that true? I don't think anybody would agree with that, do you?
No. But I think the argument that someone like Ray Langton might have about why it's important to be constructed as a speaker whose voice is equally heard to anyone else's is that when it comes to deciding what religions are allowed in society, what morality is allowed in society, what government policies are, you want a voice as equal to anyone else, especially if they're legislating on your social group.
I think I would agree with that, yeah.
So then how do we fight back against this idea that porn creates a speaker whose voice isn't heard?
Okay, and then so what was I think there was a part of this we already addressed it, but like, how do you get over the fact that almost every kind of speech creates a speaker who quote unquote isn't heard. That the white supremacist talking is necessarily denying some amount of speech to a black person. That an anti-LGBT person is to some extent creating environments that are unsafe for LGBT people. Like, isn't almost all speech necessarily going to have some contraindication or some like disaffected group that is now feeling denied? That's kind of where the whole progressive thought is right now of like, well, we're anti-freedom of speech because if you're pure freedom of speech, that means that some people are never going to feel safe speaking, you know?
Yeah, well, that's the argument. This is where like pornography, anti-porn people and hate speech people tend to align. So they move away from like the conservative religious right and to the more like CRT people. Is it like, okay, but then you've got a situation where, the white supremacist is controlled by the fact that his thoughts are ridiculed through society because we see they don't have merit. And that is Dworkin's thing saying, well, you talk and then you'll be ridiculed, and you can't say that you have to have the perfect conditions in order to speak. Like, no one's going to grant you that. I don't know how to resolve the problem. I don't either, but I don't necessarily think it's illegitimate to say that porn and minstrel shows and all of that does create an unequal speech environment.
And then, okay, I'm sorry, just real quick. So what was the answer to like everything creates an unequal speech environment? Like, how do you, why is it bad that happens? Like because I'm going to reiterate.
You don't have equality. So freedom of speech then goes against the right to equality between peoples.
Can I pull out don't the CRT people do the equality versus equity? Like, equality doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has a right to unencumbered speech. Like, equality is probably going to be, like, in some places we're going to be unequal and in other places we're going to be equal, right? Like, I think people would argue that things like affirmative action pushes towards equality, but that's because it tries to further equity at the expense of equality, right?
Yeah. I think what the argument would be is that when we're talking about speech as a domain where we're deciding things like morality and law, if you have a bunch of men who love porn saying porn's fine, and you have a bunch of women whose voices are sort of eliminated from the conversation, and I would argue back against someone like Meghan who does the exact same thing, except she won't listen to the voices of pro porn workers who say, I have a fine time at work. It's like she won't hear their voices, so she can't have a solid view of the actual situation because she only wants to hear people who've had a terrible time in porn. And so in the larger conversation, if you don't hear women saying, I'm feeling subordinated by these like tenets of morality, by these things in government, if you discount their voices automatically, how are you ever going to have morals
just because
and
you're
laws
discounting them in
all of society?
Just because you're discounting them in one arena doesn't mean you're discounting them in all places, no?
Well, how democratically do you get represented if you don't have a right to be heard?
Well, but I mean, are you losing your right to be heard across all of society because your right to be heard might be a little bit encumbered in porn? Like, couldn't you argue that, like, yeah, maybe porn is not the best place, but maybe like women's unequal success in school or unequal success in and other forms of like advocacy or representation? There's probably more like women's advocacy groups than male advocacy groups, right? That these like serve as like a counterbalance mechanism, or no? I don't know. I'll have to think about it. My instinct says no, because like there's going to be places like, how do you argue there's equal society when affirmative action exists, right? I feel like whatever argument you're going to use there is the one you would use here, right? You'd say, well, affirmative action obviously exists to some extent to counterbalance like other inequalities in society, so we can be unequal in some areas to compensate for the inequality in other areas. Yeah. I want to think about this because I don't actually know the answers or the arguments well enough. But I sense that affirmative action is a right to have an unrepresented group better represented. So like I think that affirmative action is a shock to the system to fix it, whereas this is an argument saying this group is completely excluded. Yeah, but women aren't completely excluded anywhere, right? Yeah, but on sex, women aren't heard as strongly as men in terms of dictating desire, dictating morals.
Isn't this all like patriarchal stuff, right?
Well, I mean, and that's the like.
I also just curious, but are there any like SWERF ideologies you don't agree with? I'm just trying to gauge an idea of exactly where you sit.
Yeah. Well, I don't agree that sex work is unethical. I don't agree that pornography is unethical. I agree that it's ethically problematic, and there are a lot of places that there can be huge pitfalls, but I see it as a place for great potential. I see it as a transformative space, not one that we need to throw away. And I don't think you can ban pornography, and I don't think that pornography ultimately I don't think that all instances of pornography subordinate women.
You don't sound that much like a SWERF then. You're more interested in
I don't think
finding
she's not a
compromises.
No, I'm not.
No,
I was
it was
joking.
said earlier. I've been listening very carefully to everything she's
Sorry,
saying.
I was joking.
Figure where you were sitting. Yeah, that's cool.
What I meant to say was I know the SWERF arguments very well, and I don't think that when someone like Meghan comes on, they look stupid. Like the SWERF arguments, not Meghan herself, but like
no, I think Meghan herself looks stupid. Meghan herself
well,
looks
you
stupid.
can say that
because there are probably SWERF arguments that are compelling, but she just isn't equipped to make any of them.
That's what I mean. So it annoyed me because I was like, look, I'm not gonna lie. When I heard you were debating her, because I grew up on Tumblr, and so like feminist currency was something that I saw a lot, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be really exciting, and I sort of started to prep stuff in case. Like, I was like, should I send like some prep to Destiny so he's like ready for these SWERF arguments? And then I was like, oh, he won't need them. And then when I listened into the conversation, it was so bad. And I was like, the arguments are actually like stronger than this. And the arguments can actually be represented without her being like, sex is special and sacred, and the woman's body is something that is always degraded whenever men look at it or touch it, and money is evil. And it's like, this was actually like SWERF arguments. I'm sorry, but they were a workhorse for feminist philosophy, and they pushed us in the right direction. Like we got to Barnard, and there was like the ultimate sex wars clash between sex positive feminists and like radical feminists. But like a lot of that work that was done in that era that people love to discount radically changed women's lives in terms of abortion and sex work. And I think that when people say like, oh, all SWERF arguments are absolutely ridiculous, you're underselling them, and they're things that actually need to be tackled and like worked through. But that doesn't mean they're correct, but it just means like the interesting and compelling parts you need to give like due deference to and work through, instead of just being like, oh, well, like she's a fucking idiot, but she unfortunately didn't do a good job.
She was a fucking idiot. True.
Yeah, but I don't think. Oh, the only other thing that I also I thought it was very funny that like, you know, this is a woman who's tweeting like, you can't take away people's rights and freedoms in order to keep them safe, and she's got like whole Substack posts on like COVID like restrictions.
Oh God!
And
I didn't
Twitter
even know.
files.
If I would have known shit like that, then I would have probably just called her. But I think if I would have called her on any of that, she would have just instantly left anyway. So whatever.
But it's just so funny because it's like you can't. In one, be like, we have to like get rid of, like, we've got to protect the women by taking away all their rights, and then on other issues like completely 360 or 180, I don't know what the phrase is, but the other thing
for
that
memeing, yeah, you're good.
Okay. Mediating forces, right, which is like, do you think when we see things, what do we do about that mental space? Like, surely we have the ability mentally to grasp with the fact that we are seeing porn and that's not how we view women, or like it is how we view women, but like this doesn't apply to all women. Like, are we underestimating people by just assuming they have no mental faculties?
I mean, I start from a position of dramatically underestimating everybody now because people are stupid. So, but that's just where I'm at.
So you think that like when people watch violent porn or like just normal porn where they might be doing like a 15-year-old watching porn with choking, do you think they're walking away being like, yeah, chicks love choking, I'm gonna choke my girlfriend tonight?
I don't know, actually. That would be really interesting. This is something that I think I've mentioned this a few times. Like in my life, and I think this is borne out in surveys as well, the overwhelming amount of preference for violent pornography, or I'm sorry, for violent sexual actions almost always comes from women. Almost every single woman I talk to is going to be saying like, oh yeah, like I'm really into choking, like I really like having my hair pulled, like yeah, I like it when a guy's like pretty rough and dominant. That's like almost ubiquitous. Like at this point, like if a girl says like, oh, like I'm not into that, that's like a shocker to me. That's like way outside the norm at this point. Now I don't know if that's a selection bias people that I talk to, but like holy shit, it's insane.
I do know that there has been an increase of reported like tears and injuries from like younger teenagers having sex because of the things that they have been watching. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the sex was like unconsensual. It could have been the girls that were pushing for it as well, and they're just, you know, experimenting too early. But I mean, it's something to consider. When
I think the really hard thing for that too, and this is so hard for all of these types of things, is it's hard to figure out if that's a good thing or a bad thing. If like stuff is being reported because people are finally aware of it, that women know that like, oh hey, this probably isn't normal, that I should have this, versus
that's
like
true.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know the answer to that at all.
I think it's also just a problem that you talked about with Kidology, which is right, like, okay, kids are going to be doing anal because they see anal. They're not going to like lube up and prep and do the shit they need to do because that's not involved in the porn video. They're going to be injuries. So we need sex education to help them with their new landscape. But no one is going to allow their kid to be taught about anal at school.
Yeah.
Like, it's just... And no... I'm sorry. When my mum had the sex talk with me, I wanted to die.
Sure.
Like, I don't think even parents and kids want to be like, oh, and if you're considering, you know, anal, and if you're going to be choked, just keep in mind that if you cut oxygen off to your brain, that could have serious impacts, like days later, and you may need to go to the... Like, no one's going to be talking to their parents about that. Schools aren't going to be allowed to do shit, so...
I understand why we say that. I do think it's possible. Like, it's awkward, but I mean, like, if you're a parent, it's your job. Like, I've had conversations with Nathan about like appropriate places to like masturbate or inappropriate things to do. Like, you're not supposed to touch yourself, blah blah blah. Like, it is possible to have these conversations. I don't buy it when parents are like, oh no, like it's so awkward, like I can never. And it's like, bro, you know they're gonna do it. Like, you have to be able to. You just have to be able to do it. It's part of being a parent. You have to be able to do it.
Yeah, well, I say I cringe, but like,
yeah, it is cringy, but I think it's because of like, I think it's because of the standards that have been set before us, right? That like parents just aren't supposed to do these things, and it's like, okay, well then, I mean, like, you can say that parents aren't supposed to do it, that's fine, but then they're going to learn from their friends at school. They're going to learn from porn. They're going to learn from whatever. Probably the last person in the world you want teaching them these things are going to be their teachers on these issues. So yeah.
I'm all for parents doing it. I'm just acknowledging that there is a generational cringe there, and I don't know how you overcome it and tell people, like, you need to be talking to your kids about this.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Especially the more, like, kids aren't having sex necessarily like you were having sex when you first started to have sex. So, like, there are some people, like, I don't know, and I don't really want to know, but I'm not even sure if my mum could have a talk to me about how to prep for anal. Like... I don't know, like what I'm saying.
I mean, like,
is,
it doesn't necessarily have to be
normalized.
that, but it could be like a gentle push in a direction. I know that this gets posted, like this thread will get posted on our relationships like every 2 months, and everybody always cringes when it happens. But it's the idea of like parents buying sex toys for kids. Like, even buying your kid like a fucking dildo and some lube is probably better than them trying to stick like wooden hand brushes like up their fucking vagina to see if it works or not, and then like having nobody to talk to or figure out in terms of like what is like an appropriate way to explore themselves sexually. Yeah, the reality is that like parents think that if they don't teach their kids about sex, they won't learn about sex. But they'll always learn about sex. They just won't learn about it from their parents. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that was pretty much everything I wanted to chat about. Yeah. And just how bad trafficking data is, if anyone ever brings it up. I know you know that, but like, it's just Polaris Project, IGM, Not for Sale. They've all been shown to like fudge their data. They're all tied up with like religious organizations and tracking sex workers and reporting them to the police. Like, the data is so incredibly bad, and the anecdotes from around the time when August Ames killed herself, like, it doesn't matter how many stories you have from that time, like, that's not data.
Wait, so do you think it's not as bad as people say it is, or?
No, I think I think human trafficking is really bad. I think...
Wow, I just want to go on record. I think human trafficking is really bad as well. So
I'm
thank
really
you.
Glad
You're so
you
brave, and
said
I
it
just
out
want
loud.
to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it out loud, because I was worried I didn't know your position. But I think human trafficking is really bad. I think it's built on bad economic policies that create poverty where people don't have a choice. I don't think banning sex work is going to... And governments aren't going to ban sex work, because sex work alleviates their responsibility to have to care for people in poverty. So
I will say, while that's true, something that makes this a bit more complicated, you're like one of those socialist, aren't you?
I'm not a socialist. I don't...
Yeah, it's okay. You are. It's okay. But like, I think that the issue here is when we talk about economic policy, we're talking about like cross-border economic policy.
That's what I mean. So I'm talking about neoliberal economic policies and globalization, creating sex work trades in India, Thailand, Mexico. And it's never those women that people like Meghan are worried about. It's only the women who are brought to America to do porn.
Sure. Well, what I was saying was that like the difficulty is that like you can have perfect economic policy in some first world country, but it's always going to be cheaper to go to an Eastern European country or some African country to like just grab somebody and do it. Yeah.
And like ultimately, if you're worried about human trafficking, your focus should be on how cheap it is for you to get an orange juice, not on like porn. And I think the problem I have with human trafficking data is how difficult it is to disaggregate, because you have also a lot of domestic workers who, when they report that they've been trafficked, will say that they were sexualized within the house. You have people who go into commercial sex trade like massaging. And so then actually you have sex work, more generally prostitution. So then to disaggregate for porn, I don't know how you would find those statistics in any reliable way when the only people reporting them back are people who are tangled up with religious organizations and police trying to shut down organizations. So I don't know how you would get good trafficking data, but I know Polaris Project, which SWERFs love to... Polaris Project, Thorn, IJM and Not For Sale are all super bad. And there was another one that was called like End. This one was from like the 2000s, but they were the ones who came up with that crazy statistic that like 80% of prostitutes have, not prostitutes, 80% of porn workers were molested as children.
Okay.
And it's just like there are 3 studies in the last 20 years on mental health of porn actors, and none of them corroborate that. And like, unless you're really strongly testing around against the general population, it's really difficult to say that there's like, cool, a bunch of people are molested. And
when you come out and you're like 28% of porn actresses were molested in their background. That sounds really bad. But if the number is like 24% of normal women are, then it's like, well, okay, well that stat doesn't actually mean anything. You have to always be matching that up against something else always,
It's like in psychology where they make you look at those black dots and make a picture. Like statistics around sex work are sort of like that. You can pull whatever you want out of them.
I'm just curious, you might not be the right person to ask, but like for argumentation or debate, what do you have any ideas when you come up against somebody like Meghan, who is either 85 IQ or just completely bad faith? Like, how do you engage in that conversation?
I think like the one thing that the money thing, I take the things that like she's not going to budge on, like she's not going to budge on the money thing, right? But she keeps saying to you like that it's sex. You have to understand like this is an extremely intimate thing. So then I want to pin her on why sex is special.
Every time I tried to get any clarifying question on anything though, it seemed like she just wanted to re-espouse her entire fucking life view and everything.
Crazy around every single, but it's like it all comes down to, for her, is sex special? And if you're I think sex is special in some cases, and I think it's ordinary in others. And I think there should be things where we have less hype around it. And I think like there are things that aren't currently criminalized. I think if you're a step parent, there should be some regulation over the sexual interaction you're allowed with your stepchild.
Jeez.
I do.
Wait, what does that mean? Like,
I think that there are a lot of stepdads or mothers' boyfriends who have sexual interactions with children above the age of consent. That
hold on, I'm just so confused what you're talking about. Are you talking about like step parents their stepchildren?
Yeah.
Yikes.
And you would make laws against that if everybody was over the age of consent?
There are laws against uncles their nieces. Like I don't think
over the age of, is that true? I actually have no idea. Is like incest actually like formally illegal?
Yes, in some places. Depends.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, as the biggest pro-incest advocate on the internet, I'm gonna have to take a hard disagree there, but
wouldn't that be like
on the
grooming?
Pro-incest as well, so
like grooming?
You guys are crazy.
Well, I don't think grooming is actually against the law, right?
Maybe it would depend on what is happening. I don't know.
Is there a legal charge for grooming?
Well, if you groom someone but you don't sexually assault them, then the crime was that you were really nice to a kid for a few years.
Exactly.
Like if you don't exploit them, then that's not grooming, right?
Yeah.
So.
But even the
actually-
sex charge, I don't think that's illegal anywhere. Like, let's say that you are a tutor to a kid in college for a long time, and you groom that person to eventually fuck you. Like, is that illegal?
Yeah, but this is exactly what I'm saying. I think, and I'm totally willing to come back another time and argue incest with you. But I think that it should be more special. There should be more regulation around that. It should be something punishable.
Interesting. And cringe.
Is this
Do you have to
specifically when
leave?
they become? Oh, sorry. Is this specifically when they become like over 18? You mean that the crime is being committed?
Okay, so for instance, in Georgia in 1996, a guy was charged with rape and aggravated sodomy of his wife's 17-year-old niece. But ultimately, he wasn't. He was only charged with something lesser because he was charged with simple sodomy because there was supposedly consensual cunnilingus. So she supposedly was consenting even though there was no consent, and she was crying, and all the evidence came out to suggest that like it wasn't a consensual act. And I think the access that boyfriends and stepdads have to children who aren't biologically related to them, the status of the relationship, which puts them into a position of authority, the automatic sort of not the potential to merge parental affection with romantic affection. I think there are a lot of issues in there that can create a terrible environment for children.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's just the really important part of this, I think, is going to come down to ages. Because if you've got like a step parent and like the kid's like 24, I mean, it's weird and kind of probably not good. But like, should it be illegal to your 25-year-old stepchild? I don't know if I care as much about that. But for like minors and stuff, that where you're being like where you're replacing like the role of an actual parent, I can see there being definitely huge issues there for sure.
Yeah, 16. Jesus.
Joanne, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Am I saying your name properly? I'm sorry.
Stephen likes to. I think it's because I spell his name sometimes with a PH, so he just calls me Joanne.
Wait, is your name not
okay.
Joanne?
My name is Joanna, and I've told you like 100 times. And every time I tell you, you just like, you hear it and you're like, yeah. And then the next time you call me Joanne.
Cringe.
This is
Okay,
like
no one
the-
cares. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
This is like the
you're
President
happy
Sunday
making me-
thing.
Yeah, who cares?
It's all right. It's just an egg. I should have expected it. But yes, Kate, go for it.
That's so funny. He pulled the President Sunday on you. Yeah, I was just interested, and less in the porn side, more. So I'm not really sure if you think about it the same way I do, but I see that a lot of women's enjoyment from sexuality is like kind of internalized male gaze, and like
Yeah, sorry, I was just saying in agreement. I was listening.
Oh, okay. Because, like, I'm thinking about something like stripping, for example. And there are a lot of women who enjoy doing, like, taking courses and doing that recreationally. But my argument would be is that, like, they've lived in a society and in a certain culture, which means that now it is considered sexy to them. But obviously that is from, like, the understanding that men find it sexy, so now they can find it sexy. And I don't think that's performative.
No, the thing is, I think objectification can be hot. I think that being looked at by someone is an important part of your sexual subjecthood. And I think that applies for men as well. And that's why in the last conversation Destiny had where people were saying porn can replace sex, I totally disagree, because porn is about interaction. It's about being seen by another, interacting with another, validated by another, having an experience with another. So being looked at, I don't think is, I think men enjoy being looked at. Like, men love it when you're like, oh my God, you're so sexy. Oh my God, you're such, oh, whatever you say to men, I don't know. But like, women aren't the only one who get looked at and validated and sexualized. And I don't think that's a negative thing. I think it would be very bad to demonize the gaze. But
I agree with you.
I think you're right in terms of women's sexuality being derivatized to be within the limitations of what men already want, and it being very hard for women to imagine their own desires extending past. And there's nothing wrong with filial desire either, like the desire to get your partner off. That's
well,
okay.
actually, so on that end, I'm kind of curious in the same vein, because this is an argument that I have a lot. Some women will say, like, I like wearing makeup because it makes me feel good. And I agree that that is a real thing, and I agree that it's possible, but it's uninteresting. I think the question is, why does it make you feel good? I don't believe, and I could be wrong, but I don't believe in another society that a normal woman, because I know women that will put on a full thing of makeup just to be around the house for the day, not even going out. Yeah. And so the question is like, would you truly elect for this in any world? Or is this just the one where men give you positive affirmation here, and now you enjoy looking like that because you've gotten that positive affirmation, and now it carries over to other points in your life, you know?
It's so hard to know. And I don't really know that. I don't know in a society where no women wore makeup and only men wore makeup if I would still wear makeup because it brings me pleasure. Like, I doubt it. But I don't think like you demonize women for like enjoying putting on makeup within the current limits of our world. Like,
sure, well, we get into, because
even if men caused you to like them.
Well, I think the difficult question is that, like, at what point is it like a healthy versus an unhealthy relationship? Because we'll leave from makeup, and now we'll go ask a more difficult question about like plastic surgery, right? Because plastic surgery for women, at least where I live, is insane. The amount of like BBLs, and a lot of women don't even consider lip fillers to be plastic surgery. Like, that's just like a thing that everybody does. Like, that's not even like cosmetic anymore. That's just like a default. So like,
I think that the question you ask about like the makeup is like not wrong, but I think it focuses on the wrong thing, because I think it's really hard to separate at this point what is a quote unquote like internalized. So I think a woman can feel, you know, like you said, women wear makeup around the house when there's no man around, but I'd obviously argue that that is because societally where she grew up, makeup was something that is part of the identity of being a woman, that is part of being desired, whatever the fuck, right? So I'd argue... I want to add to that. Like, I used to wear makeup when I used to work at Starbucks and I was literally a teenager. Because if I didn't, people would ask me if I'm sick or I'm ill. So you get to the point where you wear a certain amount of makeup just so people don't tell you that you look shit. Because if you don't wear any makeup, then you feel worse about yourself.
Yeah, but then...
at least wearing some.
Yeah, but that's why my question is like, when people say it makes me feel good when you do it on your own, is it just because it's been reinforced socially so much?
I think that is the case. And I think that a great sort of evidencing thing for that is that like makeup and plastic surgery and the beauty revolution, the beauty myth, didn't really come in major force until women entered the workforce. And once women entered the workforce and they were no longer like imprisoned by domesticity, we needed to give women a new way to sublimate all their like professional ambition, so we hyper-focused them on their appearance. And now you need to be excruciatingly skinny and you need to look perfect. And then once women got good with makeup, we were like, no, you're wearing too much makeup, you need to be natural. So then plastic surgery came in because I need to look beautiful without the makeup, so I need to put it under my skin so that I always look this way. And it becomes a way to like get rid of women's money, keep women focused on something else, and like that's a very feminist point of view people might object to, but the timing matches up.
So I think that I generally agree that a lot of women have it like that. The problem with that feminist view that I do agree with is that we're kind of like I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily since we live under like a patriarchal structure. I don't think it's necessarily bad that as a natural process of that existence, women like absorbed certain things, and I don't think it's necessarily performative. So I think some women want to look good, but obviously what looks good was determined by men. But now I would consider it like a personal preference of theirs. So I wouldn't see it as like a desire to like actively or consciously satiate men anymore. Like it becomes your own personal.
It's internalized, of course, but the issue isn't so much that women enjoy or not enjoy makeup. It's that the limits of what they're allowed to enjoy are dictated by men. So if women enjoyed makeup, that'd be fine. But it's the fact that ultimately it's really difficult for a fully ontologically distinct idea of woman with her own desires, her own knowledge, her own this, can exist in a world that isn't dominated by this idea of a universal human being, and that universal human being happens to be men. So women always, yes, women and men are different, but they're not quantitatively different. They're qualitatively different. And when you treat it like it's a quantitative difference, women will always fall short because it's men who are the yardstick. So women are always going to be less strong than men. They're going to be less capable. But if we treat it as qualitative differences, and not even yin yang, not that men and women are complementary, that they don't work in relationship to one another. They're ontologically distinct. Then we would understand that's an ethics of difference. Like, it would be ethical to acknowledge and respect the difference in another person. But I don't know how you get there. That's what I'm reading at the moment.
In regards to Katie's question too, about like some women might do this thing because, you know, the beauty standards have been set, so now they're able to do that, but that's okay. I think the issue isn't looking at what women can do. I think the issue isn't looking at what women can't do. So if you say like, well, I wear makeup, I understand men set the beauty standards, but fuck it, I can do that, and that feels fine for me. It's like, okay, that's okay. But what if you wanted to grow armpit hair as a woman? Well, now it's like, okay, well, you can't do that because now those hardcore like beauty standards that are are still there are essentially a limiting principle instead of something where it's like, oh, I found some enjoyment of this and I can do this, I think, which is an issue.
Well, yeah, but the reason I brought that up was more because I find it interesting that, like, in the past, as Joanna said, Joanna, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Call her Joanne.
Okay.
For short.
I'm not gonna call her Joanne. I'm nice, not like you. Yeah. Fuck. Okay. So before it was like, if I take Joanna's argument as what she said wholesale, that like women entered the workforce and now they have to wear makeup and they have to put a lot of effort into their appearance. But now even when you try to exist as whatever authentic version of yourself as a woman that you see, even if it is obviously influenced by like the male gaze or the patriarchy, now there's also critique on the other side. Like, why are you wearing too much makeup? Are you wearing makeup because it's a healthy thing or is it a bad thing? And it's more like this continuous feedback loop of questioning and questioning. Why are women doing this? What should they be doing differently? What can they do? What they cannot do? Instead of, I guess, letting women set that tone. Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, but there's always a push-pull on everything, and it's hard to figure out like what is right.
No, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it's part of the conversation. And the thing that I wanted to say earlier about like the sexuality element regarding what you said, Joanna, was that like I agree that it's set in the boundaries of what men want or what men set up, which is why even though I think that a lot of women enjoy sexuality in the confines of like the boundaries that men established previously, I really urge women to seek out like what interests them outside of that, as far as they can do that, you know. If it doesn't interest them at all, you know, then that's fine. But I think there's a lot of utility in women's sexuality that looks
I think the issue is that, like, even when we say that, though, the thing that makes it so complicated is we're always begging the question, like, women should just do what interests them. But what if things interest them just because men have preferred it in the past?
Yeah.
Then that's okay.
What is
This
it?
is also this silly idea that I think people hold about, like, what a person is. And they, like, historically, we've understood human beings to be these, like, autonomous, independent things. But we come into the world relational. We come into the world with relationships, and those relationships define who we are, what we like, what our values are. So you're not going to be able to escape other people influencing you. It's about making sure that, like, I think ethical sex comes down to the idea that, was there space for me to express my desires in a way that could be transformative? Not that I had to express my desires. Maybe I wanted to take a back seat. But, like, was there space where I could say, I like this or I don't like this, and the other person that I'm having sex with, or persons, their desire and what they wanted would be transformed by me expressing that desire? Because, like, if your ethical partner is like, well, I don't give a shit what you want, then you're not having good sex.
Do we mean good in an ethical sense or good in a...
A little bit of both. A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Gotcha.
But Destiny, like, I feel like I completely get what you're saying. It's just that for me, that line of thinking always goes to, well, everything that we believe in is influenced by, like, the society we grew up, the people who raised us, stuff like that. Like, even when you say, I'm an independent thinker, like, the way that you learned how to independently think is stuff that people taught you. Like, everything is influenced by, like, ghosts' paths, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
I don't
true,
think
but we're
necessarily
trying...
a problem.
Well, it's not necessarily a problem, but it could be a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what has to always be investigated, right? Like,
How
if black
exactly?
people... What?
I was going to say, how exactly do we deconstruct what is that men like versus what is that women like? And how much do we have to get to the point where it's 99% of men hate this, therefore women like this? This is more of their thing.
No, it's not about men hate it, right? Because women are allowed to like what men like, but we know that men like things that extend beyond the desires of women. We need to know, like, there needs to be an excising of the limitations on, firstly, women's ability to express desire, because it is still, as sexy as women are, it's still a taboo for a girl to say that she desires sex and that she desires particular sex acts. So first we need to excise the limitation on women's ability to say they desire things, and then once we do that, we can probably start to explore desires that go beyond what women are automatically thinking, oh, maybe my boyfriend will like this, maybe this guy I'm dating will like this. And I don't know the exact path to that, but we're not even having that, like, this might be a nice way to start thinking about that. Just asking questions.
Yeah, because even in like the most promiscuous communities, women are like shamed for.
Yeah. You're allowed to be sexy, but you're not allowed to want sex.
Oh, something else that is so intensely interesting to me. I don't know if you follow this at all, but women. So if I watch a sexy video game, that's awesome. If I play The Witcher 3 and I watch Geralt go and women or whatever, it's so cool, it's funny, it's hip, it's awesome. Sometimes watching porn on stream can be like funny, awesome, people are like laughing or whatever. You saw Anna Ross do it initially. Like all of these things are like cool and fun and everything. And you'll never ever ever see people talking about like, I can't believe there was sex in The Witcher. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
However, it seems like the second a woman is in the driver's seat of that, so a woman comes out and does like booby streams or cosplays in a sexy man or whatever, now a lot of people, men and women, have a huge problem with it. Why?
Yeah.
That's just very interesting to me.
I even wanted to talk to you about this when you were talking about the deepfakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you were talking about fan fiction, and I actually was an avid fiction writer for about 5 years.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I was like deep in the Harry Potter community, and I always wrote like main character and non-canon when I was writing sort of like as a mirror for myself. But whenever I wrote sexual stuff, I was like in the degenerate community, and this is most fan fiction writers are young women in their adolescence, and overwhelmingly gay content is the sexual content. So when I wrote any sexual content, it was between Harry and Draco, because it allows
slash and shit or whatever was like insanely popular among women in those communities. Yeah,
because ultimately slashies is the bottom of fandom, because oh my god, you're not interested in the story, you're only interested in like mimicking relationships, and then the grosser part below that is like degenerates. I wrote some mpreg. I'm not proud of it, but it happened.
Okay.
And like ultimately writing two men having sex is what a lot of young women do, because they don't feel that they are either being sexually aggressive, so in the agential seat, but they also don't feel like sex is being thrust upon them. They don't feel sexualized. They're allowed to experiment with a sexual act while sitting in the seat of a spectator. And I think that when women are in like forced into the position of being the audience of sex or like the agent of sex, maybe playing video games, it brings them too close to that sexuality, which we haven't freed up for women, which makes it a more uncomfortable thing.
Another thing that I've heard about, like why people have a problem when women bring up like the sexual element, like for example, booby streamers, is that I heard a lot of people talk about like female privilege and how they can monetize themselves in a way that men can't, to access certain benefits while using their sexuality.
Yeah.
So that's another element.
But it's never been a problem for the men capitalizing off the women ever. Any of the guys right now talking about how horrible it is that women are getting this huge leg up by doing OnlyFans have never in their life criticized people like Hugh Hefner or any of the big porn studios, saying like, I can't believe these men are enriching themselves off the bodies of women. It's only a problem when the women are doing it, which is very interesting.
And I also don't have much of an issue when it's VTubers and not real women that they can see, because VTubers make like do some very sexual content, and then they even make stuff on Fansly. There's some of the biggest creators on Fansly.
That's fucking hilarious. And
I know,
it
is incredibly funny. I asked the guy that owns it, and he told me that. So it's interesting that when there is a disconnect, when you're just looking at an anime avatar, even though it's being ran by a girl and they're doing all the same types of things that a booby streamer might do, that's okay. It's very odd.
Well, I think it's because like research shows that when a woman, like even there's Joanna, you probably know this, there's like studies that talk about how when women have nipples that poke out, like both men and women view them as less intelligent, more promiscuous, stuff like that. So societally, we just look less favorably of women who we think are sexual, that are active, that are interested, that are pursuing those things, and we assume a lot of more negative qualities because of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate.
It's the idea, like, I don't know. Sometimes I have like intuitions, and I worry that because other times I talk about like actual research and stuff, I don't want those to get mixed up. So this is just my feelings on the issue. But I think that like when it comes to the erotic space where people make us feel things, where people like turn us on, we completely separate that from the mental space. So when we see like things that are erotic, we automatically like block it off, like things can't exist in multitudes, therefore this person must be stupid. Although to be fair, like sometimes there's this, I think like Emrata is responsible for a lot of crimes in my book, because she sort of pushed this narrative that conflated like image-based abuse with sexual assault. She's like the first person to really do it. But she's like insisting that people view her as intelligent. And there's like no space to actually have a reaction to her because she's so dogmatic on the idea that we have to see her as smart. And I think she's like undercutting herself. Yeah, that was
I'm
me.
sorry.
That has nothing to do with
Wait,
anything,
real
sorry.
quick. I don't know. I might just be dumb. Who is this Emrata person?
Emily Ratajkowski, the chick who was in Blurred Lines video, super hot. She's famous for being like incredibly hot. I really don't believe that you don't know who she is.
She's famous.
I don't believe you.
Okay.
No.
Am I supposed to?
Wait. Sorry.
Ask who in the like poll your chat. Everyone knows who Emrata is.
She is gorgeous. Blurred Lines. Some people are saying who.
Oh, Blurred Lines.
What was Blurred Lines, a movie?
Music video.
Okay, I don't know. I don't follow pop culture anything. Okay, so fuck you.
Blurred Lines has a lot to do with your type of discourse, Destiny. Actually, you
What,
should
pro-rape,
check it out.
pro-racism?
Oh, come on! No, what? Silly. Actually, Joanna, what you were saying reminded me kind of what you were talking about earlier about sexualization. And I think there's a really big issue, not sexualization, but like objectification. And I don't have necessarily an issue with sexualization or objectification of women. Like, I think you can sexualize a woman. Like, you can look at a woman and she has her boobs out in a tank top and it turns you on, you have a boner. I don't know. You can think about whatever you want. For me, it's more like, I do believe that men and women and humans have the capacity to, like, have that experience and still treat the person with respect. The problem is that, like, dehumanizing and objectifying, I don't believe are the same thing. So objectifying isn't really the problem.
But you dehumanize the person who bags you groceries. Like I don't think there's a requirement in society.
Speak for yourself.
No, I'm saying it generally.
Dehumanize all my baggers.
No, but there are people in your life, like maybe not every day, but there are days when you're having a bad day and you're not like, I wonder if that person is spiritually okay and whole, and I hope they're living a happy life. Like that's just like, let me get the point out, right? Which is like, I don't think dehumanization is something that is necessarily the problem. I think the problem is, like, let's say booby streamers, right? They're allowed to do that without men thinking like, oh, she got her tits out, therefore if I want to look at like pornographic images of her, that's my right, because she shouldn't have sexualized herself.
Exactly.
You're allowed to have a sexuality that isn't then completely scapegoated into a man's sexual desires. Like, you're allowed to exist as a sexual person without that becoming like, okay, I'm now imprisoned to whatever men want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
nobody
that's
said
what I
that
meant with
nobody said that objectification is the only kind of dehumanization, though. Like, but by definition, objectification usually has dehumanization and degradation.
Okay, so what are you referring to?
I'm just saying that dehumanizing someone sexually, or in the context of this conversation, doesn't necessarily have to mean that you can't dehumanize people.
I think the problem is, I think dehumanizing is a really loaded word, and it like, what does it actually mean? Because if we take it at face value to treat somebody like not a human, well, like, does that mean I'm committing bestiality when I'm like masturbating to a person? Because clearly I'm viewing them as some kind of human, right?
I'm not always considerate of everybody's feelings around me all of the time. Just because I don't consider the feelings of someone in the supermarket doesn't necessarily mean that I'm dehumanizing them.
But are you treating them as an object or a means to an end? Does a bagger exist for you as a human being whose life and like everything you're taking care of, that you're being considerate of at all times, or are they just a person that bags groceries for you and that's all they exist to you for?
Yes, I'm generally aware that other humans I interact with are humans, and I don't dehumanize them just by not thinking of them.
But you don't treat them as such, right? You treat them as a bagger. That's it, right? You've never gone up to a bagger and been like, "How you doing? Like, how's life? Like, let's chat. Like, let's catch up." Like, they're there to perform the function of like being a bagger, right?
But that's not required for you to not dehumanize them.
What do you mean though, right? Because like, for instance, if you look at the deepfake thing, the fact that the girls who had their heads put onto the deepfake, the fact that they were those girls mattered a whole lot to the content. So you can't say that they were dehumanized, because the fact, for instance, that it was QTcinderella mattered to the deepfake. She wasn't any old person. She wasn't less than a human. She was QTcinderella. The deepfake was built around recognizing her not only as a human, but as a subject.
But it was done, and it's often done intentionally to degrade people.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
I think she was derivatized, that she was used in service, and don't be careful about, people piss on each other for sexual gratification. Be careful about degradation and sex, because it's a morally loaded word that is used to moralize queer sex and a lot of queer sex practices. I don't think she was degraded. She was derivatized, and she was used as purely there to function men's sexual desires. She was...
Okay. But like, even if something is made with the intention of we just want QTcinderella porn, that doesn't mean that every single person that is making and distributing this doesn't know that it's going to get into the hands of people that are going to harass them and degrade them on the basis of its existence.
Sure, they could, but that's fundamentally a different claim than it was made with the intention of degrading the person.
But it's also made with intention for degrading people as well. Like, we're not going to sit here and pretend that does not happen.
We're not saying whether it does or doesn't happen. We're saying whether or not we think that that's like the primary drive for it. I think the primary drive is people just probably really want to jerk off because it's like a forbidden type of thing to like.
Destiny, isn't it possible that there are some people who want to have QTcinderella porn and some people who want to harass her, and that those two groups exist? Like, some streamers came out and said this is used for harassment and like purely for harassment, and I'm sure some guys just really want QTcinderella porn, like. But to say that it's not, that it's never about harassment, or that
hold on, whoa, stop. We need to follow the conversation. Hold on, stop, follow the conversation. I never said it's never about harassment. I never said there aren't some people that don't do it. I've never said that it's only, I'm just saying that the primary, that means most of the people that are jerking off to this stuff are probably doing it because it's like a forbidden type of like pornography.
Okay, so I think most of the people who are jerking off to that do you think most of the people who distribute it and send it to their friends and make memes about it and post it and tell her about it and joke
people
to her
that are telling her about
it?
No, people that are telling her about it are probably a bit more insidious, but that's not the average person probably.
The people that are buying this and supporting this are therefore supporting what they know is then harassment and degradation. It doesn't matter if they're not engaging in it directly themselves; they are supporting.
But you're making a claim. You're making a claim about the mind state of the person. If you want to make a claim about the industry that by supporting something that you might be supporting harassment, that's fine. But you made the claim that they're only doing it to harass somebody. Like that would be like saying I only buy shoes to enslave children. That's not true.
They know that this content was not put out consensually, so they're okay in supporting non-consensual content.
Kelly, the reason I'm so like dogged on what the term should be used to describe the harm is because when you describe the harm, like you can find the remedy. So I don't think that like in revenge porn even, right? Like actual images of someone which people are putting out to humiliate their exes. The fact that it is the living person who is the ex matters. So it's not dehumanization. It's not treating them as an object. Their subjecthood is central to the act of humiliation. Right?
Do you mind if I challenge you on that?
Sure.
I just isn't it possible that because I think it's a fascinating interpretation of what you're saying, and I'm actually I think it's super interesting and complex, and I like it. But I also think that there is a dehumanizing element of wanting to humiliate and hurt and harm and degrade someone. So wouldn't it be possible to say that someone can still be a subject and we still humanize them and use their humanity while still having other elements that are dehumanizing to them?
Is it like those things for someone's humanity to be central while you're dehumanizing them?
For someone to be dehumanized, they have to be a human. So we have to acknowledge that they exist as that person to then dehumanize them. So this is kind of like, what?
Yeah, this is why I said dehumanization is not equal like objectification. When you dehumanize someone, you're not necessarily making them.
What do you mean?
Well, we don't suddenly not acknowledge that they aren't like.
Well, what do we mean when we say dehumanize though? What does that mean? I guess let's start with that.
Treat them as less than a human.
So what does it mean to be treated as?
Okay, hold on, wait. You're like using the word. That's like, what does it mean to dehumanize somebody? Well, that's when you the humanize of them. Like, what does it mean?
Can I just pull the Google definition?
Well, when we dehumanize people, we don't think that they are literally a shoe. We don't actually think they're actually an object.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends on what we're talking about, right? Like, if we're talking about like war and the dehumanization of troops, we're literally using them as cannon fodder. When we're thinking about slavery, we're literally using someone as just a piece of machinery to do a job, right?
No, but you're not using them. Can I Googled it.
Wait, no. The Google definition doesn't matter because we've just had like a 20-minute conversation about it. So you can't appeal to the Google definition. We just want to know. I don't think there's, for me, Joanne might feel a different way about this. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to define it. I just want to know what definition you guys are working off and then to further the conversation. Because appealing to like a definition now on Google doesn't tell me what you guys have meant when you said it prior to this, which I think is what's worth exploring.
Okay, sure. Kelly, I don't want to interrupt you. Do you want to go first, or?
I mean, I feel like I said what I meant to say, which is like, I don't understand this concept of just because you know that the name of the person that you are dehumanizing doesn't mean that you can't dehumanize them.
Stop! Hold on. At least summarize what she said correctly. I don't even know if I agree with her, but that was she said that the identity of the person was central to the enjoyment, not just that you know the name and it's like Death Note. So the question is, can the identity of the person be central to it and it still be dehumanization? That's the question.
Yes, I don't understand why it couldn't be the case.
Because it seems like if it was a robot, it wouldn't be any fun. But now that it's QTcinderella, now that we've humanized it in a certain way, that's where all of the enjoyment comes from. The subjectivity of it. That's
not humanizing it. That's just changing its identity
to a human.
You see it. Yeah,
what
but that's not humanizing it.
What is
human? It was always a human in the first place. They just photoshopped a face over it.
What is humanizing something and what is dehumanizing it? What is it to dehumanize?
In the context of this, it's reducing them to less. Like, if we're talking specifically sexual objectification, yeah. Like,
I disagree with objectification because objectification suggests the subject doesn't matter. I argue instead for a theory of derivatization where someone's sexuality is reduced to fit within the desires of the viewer. So derivatization more accurately addresses the harm, and that's important because addressing the harm correctly means that we can remedy it.
So do you mind just quickly repeat? So you think objectification, you're against objectification because what does it do to value?
It doesn't accurately diagnose the harm. QTcinderella being the identity in the body matters. The fact that she's responding, the fact that her face is making movements, the fact that the body is moaning, the enjoyment is a subject thing. That is an active subject. If it was just a robot, or if it wasn't moving, if it was an object with no subjectivity, then that would be objectification. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at a subject participating in a sex act.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, when it comes to sexual objectification, you are simply taking someone that is not sexual, as QTcinderella would be, and then turning them into a sexual object, and that is, by definition, a type of dehumanization.
No, I don't know what you mean by a sex object. I'm more than happy to go through the history of objectification with you, but when people talk about sex objects, it's not just using people for sex.
Wait, what is it when you wait, Joanna, when you say using someone as a sex object, what do you mean by that?
Using someone as a sex object, for instance, might be sticking your in them and pushing back and forward and coming and leaving, and whether they did anything wouldn't matter, whether they reacted wouldn't matter, whether they were there or someone else wouldn't matter. They would be completely fungible. Their enjoyment, their participation wouldn't matter whatsoever. So essentially they would be akin to the way that you could pick up one hammer or another hammer to bang in a nail.
Okay.
Can I address the dehumanization and objectification? I'm sorry, I just don't want to interrupt you guys. I don't understand the way you describe objectification. Because clearly we can have objects that are more dear to us and are more meaningful and valuable to us than other human beings. Some people would like fawn over the computer and don't give a that other people are like dying on the street, right? Just because something is an object doesn't mean it doesn't have value. for most people, most of their objects mean a lot more to them than other humans' lives that they don't know and understand.
I don't think that's true. I think that we have a special category ontologically of things that are people, that are subjects, and I think that it's fundamentally, it occupies a totally different space than objects. Like, if we take the most precious object in the world to us, and you're asked to weigh the cost between that and the life of a human, if you chose the object, you would be universally panned in society as being a piece of shit, right?
Okay, then do you want me to rephrase it?
Well, I don't think it was a phrasing problem, I think I just disagree with you, but go for it if you want to try it.
Okay. I don't mean that societally we value human lives more than we value objects. I mean that individually, as we interact with objects versus with humans, objects a lot of the time have a lot more personal value to us. So just because something is an object doesn't mean that it's lesser. And just because someone's a human doesn't mean that it's greater.
So
Sure.
what's the issue with objectification? If we don't value something less, who cares?
I
Yeah, 'cause
said
at
that I don't think that there's an issue with objectification.
Oh my God.
That was my
Hold
argument.
on, Katie, are you ready for this? You're about to get fucking slammed. Did you just make Jordan Peterson's argument for why maybe it would be good to value rape as a property right of men?
No,
because men
I
would be
didn't
more
actually.
invested in women as an object that they own instead of actually like treating them as humans?
Oh my God.
Maybe?
Do you want to talk about this?
Well, I'm just curious because you're saying that some people could treat objects more dearly than people. Well, wasn't that Peterson's argument for treating women as property?
That was. Did you hear when I said that's not necessary? Oh, I didn't say that. But we agreed that societally that's not something that we want and we think that is bad, right? So when Jordan Peterson is making that argument, he's actually self-reporting as being a shitty person.
Well, I don't know
Didn't
what...
you just say we value objects more than humans in some cases?
Wait, do you, am I not making, okay, I'm
If
sorry.
we value
maybe I'm
property
not
as much
thinking
as we
clearly.
value human beings, what's the issue with Jordan Peterson saying women should be property?
Yeah, that point's
Who's
objectified.
we value? There's a societal appreciation of objects versus humans, and the way that humans personally interact with things around them. Like, you guys are conflating this, and I get why it's convenient, but it's not engaging with my point.
Bad faith accusation.
How is that bad faith?
Well, when you
Engage
say,
with
I'm sorry,
what I'm saying.
we are, but when you say convenient, you make it sound like we're just doing it because it's easy to like win the debate.
Okay.
Doesn't she
Then-
mean when she's saying that we like value objects on like a personal level more than we might value some random people we don't even know? That's just based on like, oh, I probably care more about my
Yeah,
house
but
than I do
sure.
like random people.
It feels like you guys are normatively loading the word objectify, though. And if you make objectification bad, it seems weird in the next breath to say, but like some objects we treat as greater than people. Because in that
I'm
case,
just going
We-
by the
we are
definition
not
I
loading it.
know. Like,
Okay, yeah, so
I'm not making up my own one.
subjects possess subjectivity, objects do not. So a subject sees, an object is seen. We are necessarily, in our lives, all subjects and objects. Objectification became an issue with Kant, who said that we should never treat people as a means to an end. They should always be an end in and of themselves. Feminist philosophy took this on and expanded it to mean instrumentality with Nussbaum and Langton. So that meant don't treat people as tools for other purposes, don't deny someone's autonomy, don't treat them as if they're lacking agency, don't treat them as if they're interchangeable with other objects of the same type, don't disregard their boundary integrity, don't think that you can own them, and don't treat them as if they don't have feelings. Don't reduce them down to just body parts, and don't reduce them just down to their appearance. Okay, so that's how it came into feminist philosophy. However, treating objectification as an actual issue demonizes all sex, because you cannot get around being a body and being an object in sexual interaction. So you have to be really careful when you use objectification as a criticism, because ultimately Kant could never talk about sex in any sort of meaningful way.
Kant never had to deal with fucking AI
I know, he died a
porn.
virgin. Kant died a virgin, so he actually never had to deal with sex at all. But the
Loser.
point is, taking his argument on objectification and applying it to sex, you will necessarily demonize all sex. So when you are diagnosing a harm, particularly in relation to sex, I am challenging you when you use objectification, because it is not correct. And you can't even explain to me what dehumanizing means. I am asking you repetitively when I'm saying maybe you mean it's an eradication of subject, and then I'm countering you saying subject matters a lot. QTcinderella, being QTcinderella matters. Responding to the sexual interaction matters. So subjecthood is clearly taken into account. So what do you mean?
Well, when
Are
we're
you
talking in the
talking to
context
Kelly?
of QTcinderella, I mean, do you want to talk first? I don't mind.
No,
But,
I think she's addressing you because I've repeatedly said I don't have an issue with sexualization. So I think she's addressing you. I'm not sure though.
Okay, let's back up and find out where we are in this conversation.
Yeah, I don't understand why my definition, which seems fairly consistent with everything I've ever read, like...
No, stop saying that. We don't care about what's being read. We don't care about... I don't think anybody here cares about the right definition.
How am I supposed to
Listen to
argue
me.
with like someone's opinion on it?
We're not arguing. It doesn't matter what the definition is. I think we're just trying to figure out like conceptually where everybody's at.
Well, she's arguing that I'm wrong, which is not.
No, she's not arguing.
that
She's
I
arguing that
don't
you're
understand
inconsistent.
what you mean.
Well, your argument is that QTcinderella doesn't stop being a person, therefore she can't be dehumanized when her face is put on AI
I'm arguing
porn.
that her subjecthood, you haven't explained to me what you mean by human. So for me, human and
I'm
subject...
supposed to explain human?
Yes, you are in this context, because if you're using dehumanization as the name of a harm, I need to know what you mean. As far as I'm concerned, a human is a subject, and a subject is QTcinderella. Her subjecthood is central, and therefore the harm is an ontological harm. It is a crime to her as a person. It's not just a sexual harm when a deepfake is made. And it's not about dehumanizing her, because her human subjectivity is what is harmed, and it has to be present to be harmed.
Yeah, but she's being reduced to an object of sexual desire, which is a type of dehumanization.
I know you got a panel anyway.
You don't want to say she's not a sex object, but she's
I have
being
explained
reduced
to you
something that
so
she
many times why she's not being objectified, because her being her, she is not just being used.
No, I understand this. You're saying that her identity hasn't been eradicated, and I don't disagree, but I don't agree that that suddenly means that it's not sexual objectification.
What is objectification to you?
So sexual objectification just doesn't exist then, because everyone has their face, or do you only think it's sexual objectification when someone gets their head cut off in a picture? Like,
well, I think the porn workers in deepfakes are being objectified. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think it's both of them are.
But I think QTcinderella, her subjecthood is the primary part of the harm, because she didn't do that, and she wouldn't do that. So it affects her ability to be in the world and be with other people. The harm is to her as a subject, and her subjecthood is central to the activity. She's not fungible. It couldn't be just anyone else. It has to be QTcinderella.
Can I re-ask the question is it not possible for someone to be a subject and in some ways for us to dehumanize them? And I get that we didn't define what dehumanize is.
I can't tell you because I don't know what the fuck dehumanizing is.
Then
I'm
maybe
so sorry.
What?
I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, so I can't tell you if it's possible because I'm not sure what that means.
Can't you just go by what the average person thinks dehumanization?
No, that's not relevant. It's what you guys are using as a definition.
But we're trying to explain, and we're getting told that we're wrong.
I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm asking you to explain what the you mean. I'm not. Sorry, I don't mean to be aggressive, but like I've told you like 1,000 times why I believe what I believe, and I'm giving you the definitions for what I believe. So I'm just asking, when you say dehumanizing, are you talking about being used as an instrument? Are you talking about denial of autonomy? Are you talking about fungibility? Are you talking about violability? Are you talking about ownership, denial of subjectivity, reduction to the body? What are you talking about?
I mean, the ways in which she has been dehumanized, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to sit here and list them all. Like,
just name one!
Well, what do you mean? Like, what do you want me to say?
I want you to explain the harm.
Explain the harm. Like, she's being used as an object against her will.
The restatement.
A sexual object.
But what does that mean?
What more do I have to... I can explain what I know what the actual harm for her would be.
Whenever I have sex, I am a sexual object. I am also a sexual subject. You cannot not be an object. There is no way to do that as a human being. You're not the main character in someone else's life. So the harm isn't objectivity. She also isn't an object. The porn worker is an object because we cut her head off. We don't even know who the fuck that is. She has no subjectivity. But QTcinderella's subjectivity is very much intact.
You're classing this as like literalism, as if objectification means we think they're actually an object, which I already disagreed with earlier as well.
I'm actually not, because I actually, as passive-aggressive as it was, went through the entire history of the philosophical concept of objectivity. So I am not treating objectification just as treating people as an object. I went through the entire classification by Nussbaum and Langton, and if you need me to send it to you, I'm more than happy to do it, but I'm not going to go through it again.
Can you stop being so condescending, which coming from me?
You just said to me that I was saying objectification was treating people as an object, which I did not do.
No, that's
so I'm not
exactly
being
what I
condescending.
said. And I was only specifically referring to the little bit that you just said. Like,
Kelly,
I'm not
please,
referring
she's
to
doing
any
it
of the
with a
things
strong
you said.
voice, so it's not condescending. It's not condescending when she's doing it like Destiny.
Wait, hold on. Stop. Never mind. I
don't even want to know.
I'm like interested. I've been very interested in listening to everything else you said to this point, but you keep using a lot of terminology that you're aware of that I probably don't know, because yes, I'm not whatever.
And you
the
know
fuck
what?
that you
I didn't.
study.
Can I just say, I want to let you know this. At no stage did I use any term that I didn't further explain. So I'm not using terminology to gatekeep anything from you. Every word I used, I explained.
You just threw at me a huge list and didn't explain any of the things that you just threw at me as a huge list. Like, was she doing this? Or was she doing this? Was she doing this? Was she doing this?
The reason, Kelly, the reason I didn't do that is because I did it just before in my huge rant. Because guess what? When I'm naming 10 things that make up the idea of objectification, it's going to take a fucking long time for me to explain every single one of them. And I'd already done it, so I didn't see the need to do it again.
May I try to explain what I think dehumanization is? Okay, so I don't agree with everything that Kelly said. For me personally, when I brought up dehumanization, I think that a big part of dehumanizing people is denying them a level of respect. In German, there's this word that translates to respect, but it's a lot more essentialist than that, and they added it to the Constitution after World War II. It's kind of like a vague statement, but the point is that humans have like a certain innate
are you talking about like human dignity?
Yeah, Würde.
Yeah, so there's definitely arguments around dignity, and I am really amiable to those arguments. In fact, I think it's a really promising way to pivot. Amiable means like I'm open to them and I have favorable opinions of them. I think dignity is a better direction for sexual ethics to go than consent, which I think at the moment is perverting sexual discourse a lot. And that, I think dignity is a really interesting approach. And I would say that QTcinderella was not treated with dignity, 100%.
Yeah. So personally, I'm not going to say that I disagree with you in terms of dignity versus consent, because I'm not really sure everything that you have in there. But in this specific case, when I was talking about dehumanization and why I don't necessarily mind objectification, is because I feel like a lot of people conflate when they objectify someone, they also forget that that doesn't excuse, like, that doesn't give them infinite consent, that doesn't give them the ability to harm someone's dignity or someone's, just because I'm a booby streamer does not mean that I've consented to you, like, making porn of me and, like, sending it to me, you know? Now, you can do that. You can do that without my consent, but it doesn't mean that I have consented to that, you know? There's a difference there. So that was going to be my line of reasoning. I'm not necessarily concerned about the concept of them objectifying her. We can't control people objectifying other people. We do it all the time. What I do ask is that objectifying someone does not mean that you need to check the license that you give yourself as you think someone allowed you to objectify them. Because I don't think you need permission for that.
I'll send you a link on this because I think it's really interesting, but like that's why I argue for derivatization, right? Because it's not that you're objectifying them, it's that you're taking them in their full form as a subject and saying, you are now derivatized to only be a reflection of my desires, and I can do with you what I want.
I think the problem with objectification and dehumanization too as terms is they don't really tell us much, and in my opinion, they stand in for be mean to. Like, I think that in every single circumstance where somebody says dehumanize or objectify, I think that you could replace the words as they were mean or disrespectful to this person, and it almost fits exactly. I don't think that people have precise definitions of what dehumanize or objectify means. And the problem is that when we're trying to figure out how to solve a problem analysis requires first problem identification. And if we just use things like dehumanize or objectify, it's kind of weird because I can think of sexual circumstances, we all can, where one or both parties might be objectifying the other to some extent, or maybe even dehumanizing depending on what you're into, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for the objectification part. So there might be, like, it feels like we need to call on something more to say why a particular thing is bad, other than to just harp on its objectification over and over again.
I just got a DM from MrGirl saying, hey, can I ask for an update on the platonicness of your relationship with Destiny? I hope you're well.
Base. Holy fucking cringe. What a creepy fucking guy.
MrGirl,
he's supposed to be releasing his...
If you're listening, we have never f***ed, and we will never f***.
Nice. He's supposed to be releasing his article like this week too, and he's still like desperately reaching out to people to try to find people to come on board with this shit, so...
This strange thing just happened. I just DM'd KellyJean to confirm that she's still platonic with Destiny, and then she said on stream that I did that as her answer. She like didn't DM me back. So now I'm listening to see if she's gonna like update it, but I don't think she is.
Oh, Jesus.
MrGirl, debate me on Judaism if you're not a coward. Okay, anyway, moving on.
I'm gonna dip, but I do want to. I am sorry that I lost my patience, Kelly, and I just sent you a friend request because I really would like to send you like what I explained everything to be, because it is the working understanding of objectification within feminist circles, and it might be useful for you to have on deck if you want to talk about objectification in the future. And I'm sorry if you felt
I mean, if this is a concept either of an ideology or for you, like, I totally appreciate that. It's just it goes against every like definition I know of these words.
It's the like used definition, but it's the way we use it is like a simplification of this built out model, but I think it would be useful for you to just have on board so that you can use it in future conversations when you talk about objectification.
Wow.
I mean, maybe I like to learn things, but I don't know if I'd necessarily take that on board as something I agree with.
Wow.
Yeah, they forwarded it to me too. I'd like to read it.
Wow.
Okay. Bye guys. Have a good night. Have fun on your panel, Destiny.
Have fun. Bye.
Destiny, do you still have a bit of time?
Let me check. I either have an hour for you or I have no time for you. Oh, I think I have like no time for you. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I just feel like every person that spoke to me today is trying to gaslight me. I'm just
stop.
I'm starting to question my existence.
Stop.
Like, I don't know anything anymore.
No. Stop. The issue that she was having was that you were using a term dehumanize or objectify, and it seems like when she was pushing you on it, you were saying that it didn't seem like she was able to derive why is this a bad thing from the definition you were giving. That was the issue that she was pushing on, not to gaslight you. Okay, what is this?
This strange thing just happened. I just DM'd KellyJean to confirm that she's still platonic with Destiny, and then she said on stream that I did that as her answer. She like didn't DM me back. So now I'm listening to see if she's gonna like update it, but I don't think she is.
Oh my god.
Of porn to